Hi, I'm Irish. All it took was one phone call from my cousin Brandon asking if he could crash for a few weeks for my parents to hand over the bedroom I'd been paying rent for since I turned 18. They said I was being selfish for wanting to keep it. That family comes first, and that I could sleep on the couch until I figured out my priorities. But 5 years later, when the foreclosure notice arrived at 1247 Maple Street, the woman they called ungrateful was the one holding the deed to their house. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning it all changed started like any other Tuesday, in Riverside, Oregon. I was up at 5:30, same as always, brewing coffee in the small kitchen of the house I grew up in. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I moved between the counter and the refrigerator, a sound I'd memorized after 22 years of living in the same two-story colonial on Maple Street. My parents, Linda and Robert, were still asleep, upstairs, and my sister Jessica wouldn't roll out of bed until at least 9. I poured my coffee into the chipped blue mug I'd claimed as mine since high school and checked my phone for messages. 3 texts from my manager at Henderson's Hardware asking if I could cover an extra shift, one from my study group about our evening session at the library, and 17 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. The calls had started around midnight and continued until 3 in the morning. I scrolled through the call log, frowning. Who calls that many times without leaving a voicemail? I was stirring cream into my coffee when my phone rang again. Same unknown number. This time I answered. Brandon's voice came through the speaker, slurred and panicked. My cousin, 3 years older than me, had always been the golden child of our extended family. While I worked 2 jobs to pay for community college classes, Brandon had spent his 20s bouncing between get-rich-quick schemes and what he called entrepreneurial ventures. Most of us called them failures. He was calling from Las Vegas, he explained, and he needed help. Not money, he was quick to clarify, just a place to stay for a few weeks while he got back on his feet. He'd been living with a girlfriend who kicked him out, and his latest business venture, something involving cryptocurrency and energy drinks, had collapsed spectacularly. He sounded desperate in a way I'd never heard before, his usual cocky confidence, replaced by something that might have been genuine fear. I told him I'd talk to my parents and call him back. Even as I said it, I knew what the answer would be. My family had always operated on a hierarchy of need, and Brandon's dramatic problems always trumped my quiet stability. When my parents came down for breakfast an hour later, I was already dressed for my morning shift at the hardware store. Mom moved around the kitchen with her usual efficiency, pulling ingredients for pancakes from the cabinet while Dad sat at the table scrolling through news on his tablet. I waited until they were both settled before mentioning Brandon's call. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Mom's face softened with concern, and Dad shook his head with the kind of frustrated sympathy reserved for family members who never quite get their lives together. Of course Brandon could stay with us, Mom said. Family takes care of family. That's what we do. I nodded and sipped my coffee, waiting for the conversation I knew was coming. It didn't take long. Dad cleared his throat and looked at me with the expression he used when he was about to deliver what he considered reasonable news. Since Brandon would need somewhere to sleep, and the couch wasn't really suitable for a long-term stay, they thought it might be best if I moved back to the living room for a while. Just temporarily, of course, until Brandon got back on his feet. I set my mug down carefully, keeping my expression neutral. For the past 4 years, since I'd turned 18 and started working full-time, I'd been paying them $300 a month for my bedroom. It wasn't much by apartment standards, but it was steady income they'd grown accustomed to. The room had become mine in every way that mattered. My books lined the shelves, my clothes filled the closet, and my desk sat under the window where I studied every night after work. I asked the obvious question about my rent payments. Would Brandon be taking over that responsibility along with the room? Mom waved her hand dismissively. Brandon was family, she said. He was going through a rough patch. We didn't charge family members rent when they needed help. The implication was clear. My payments had been tolerated as long as they were convenient. But they weren't actually necessary. I was family too, after all. I finished my coffee and gathered my things for work. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There wasn't much point in arguing. My parents had made their decision, and any protest from me would only confirm what they already believed about my character. I was being selfish for wanting to keep a room I was paying for. I was being unreasonable for not immediately volunteering to give up my space for someone who needed it more. The hardware store was busy that morning, a steady stream of contractors and weekend DIY warriors keeping me occupied at the register and helping customers find everything from paintbrushes to plumbing fixtures. I'd been working at Henderson's for 3 years, ever since I graduated high school, and I genuinely enjoyed the work. There was something satisfying about helping people solve practical problems, about knowing exactly which screw would fix a loose cabinet door or which primer worked best on different surfaces. Mr. Henderson, the owner, had been talking about promoting me to assistant manager for months. The raise would be modest, maybe $2 an hour, but it would help with my college expenses. I was taking classes part-time at the community college, working toward a business degree that I planned to transfer to Portland State eventually. The plan was simple: save money, study hard, and build towards something better than what Riverside had to offer. During my lunch break, I called Tyler, my best friend since middle school. He was the only person who really understood my family dynamics, having witnessed enough holiday gatherings and birthday parties to see how these things usually played out. When I told him about Brandon and the room situation, he was quiet for a long moment. Tyler had his own theory about my family's behavior, one he'd shared with me more than once over the years. According to him, they saw me as the responsible one. The one who would always land on her feet no matter what happened. Because I didn't create drama or demand attention, they assumed I didn't need support. Meanwhile, Brandon's chaos made him seem more vulnerable, more deserving of help and accommodation. I'd never thought about it quite that way, but as I sat in my car outside the hardware store eating a sandwich from home, Tyler's words settled into something that felt uncomfortably true. My parents weren't trying to hurt me. They genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. But their version of right didn't include considering my feelings or acknowledging that I might have legitimate reasons for wanting to keep the space I'd been paying for. That evening, I came home to find Brandon's car in the driveway. A 10-year-old sedan with a cracked windshield and a bumper sticker that read, "Crypto Millionaire in Training." I could hear voices from the kitchen as I walked. Through the front door, the animated conversation that always accompanied Brandon's visits. He had a gift for storytelling, turning his failures into adventures and his setbacks into learning experiences that would surely pay off in the long run. When I walked into the kitchen, Brandon jumped up from the table and pulled me into one of his characteristic bear hugs. He looked older than I remembered, his hairline receding slightly, and his face carrying the kind of fatigue that comes from too many late nights and too much stress. But his smile was the same, charming and just, a little sheepish, the expression of someone who knew he was asking for more than he deserved, but couldn't help hoping it would work out anyway. He thanked me profusely for letting him stay, as if the decision had been mine to make. He promised it would only be for a few weeks, just until he could get his next venture off the ground. He had some connections in Portland, he explained. People who were interested in his ideas about sustainable energy and cryptocurrency mining. All he needed was a little time to put the pieces together. My parents beamed at him with the kind of pride they usually reserved for Jessica's nursing degree or my cousin Sarah's wedding photos. Brandon had always been the family's success story, in waiting, the one with big ideas and bigger dreams. The fact that none of those dreams had materialized yet was just evidence of how difficult it was to be truly innovative in today's economy. After dinner, I went upstairs to pack my things. Brandon offered to help, but I declined. There wasn't much to say, and I preferred to handle the transition quietly. I folded my clothes into garbage bags and boxes, wrapped my few decorative items in old towels, and carefully packed my textbooks and notebooks. The room looked strange and empty without my belongings, like a hotel room waiting for the next guest. I moved my things to the living room, arranging them as neatly as possible. In the corner behind the couch, my desk wouldn't fit, so I set up a small folding table near the window where I could study. It wasn't ideal, but it would work temporarily. Everything was temporary, after all. Brandon would get back on his feet, find his own place, and I'd move back upstairs. That was the plan. The first week wasn't too bad. Brandon made an effort to be considerate, keeping his music low and offering to help with household chores. He spent most of his time on his laptop, researching investment opportunities and reaching out to his network of contacts. He talked about his plans constantly, filling dinner conversations with details about blockchain technology and renewable energy markets that none of us really understood, but all nodded along with politely. I adjusted to sleeping on the couch, though it took several nights to get comfortable. The living room was never completely dark, with streetlight filtering through the curtains and the digital clock on the cable box casting a green glow across the ceiling. I bought a sleep mask and earplugs, small accommodations that helped me maintain some semblance of normal rest. Studying was more challenging. The living room was the hub of family activity, and finding quiet time for homework required careful timing. I learned to work early in the morning before anyone else was awake, or late at night after the house had settled into silence. My grades didn't suffer, but the extra effort was exhausting in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. By the third week, Brandon's temporary stay was feeling more permanent. He'd stopped mentioning specific timelines for finding his own place, instead talking vaguely about waiting for the right opportunity to present itself. His cryptocurrency research had evolved into day trading, which seemed to involve staring at charts on his laptop for hours, while making increasingly frustrated phone calls to someone he referred to as his broker. The house began to show signs of his extended presence. His belongings migrated from the bedroom to common areas, his shoes by the front door, and his papers spread across the dining room table. He ate more than his share of groceries without offering to contribute to the shopping, and he left dishes in the sink with the casual assumption that someone else would take care of them. I mentioned the situation to Tyler during one of our regular coffee meetings at the diner downtown. He listened with the patient attention of someone who'd heard variations of this story before, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. What was my plan? How long was I willing to live on the couch while Brandon figured out his life? I didn't have a good answer. Part of me kept hoping the situation would resolve itself naturally, that Brandon would find success with one of his ventures and move on to something bigger and better. But another part of me was beginning to understand that my family's definition of temporary might be very different from mine. That night, I tried to study for an economics exam while Brandon conducted a loud video call with potential investors in what he described as a revolutionary new app concept. The call went on for over an hour, filled with buzzwords about disruption and market penetration that sounded impressive but seemed to communicate very little actual information. When it finally ended, Brandon came into the living room with his usual optimistic energy, asking if I minded if he watched some television to unwind. I gathered my books and moved to the kitchen table, but even there I could hear the sound of whatever action movie he'd chosen. I tried to focus on supply and demand curves, but my concentration kept drifting to the growing realization that this arrangement wasn't working for anyone except Brandon. The next morning, I approached my parents about setting a more definite timeline for Brandon's stay. Mom was making breakfast, scrambling eggs while Dad read the newspaper at the kitchen table. I waited for a natural break in their routine before bringing up my concerns. The reaction was swift and disappointing. Mom turned from the stove with the expression she used when she was genuinely surprised by my behavior. She reminded me that Brandon was family, that he was going through a difficult time, and that temporary inconvenience was a small price to pay for helping someone we cared about. Dad looked up from his newspaper long enough to nod agreement, then returned to the sports section. I tried to explain that it wasn't about not wanting to help Brandon, but about needing some kind of plan or timeline. I was paying rent for a room I couldn't use, sleeping on a couch that wasn't designed for long-term occupation, and trying to study in a house that was increasingly organized around Brandon's needs and schedule. The conversation didn't go well. My parents seemed genuinely puzzled by my complaints, as if they couldn't understand why I was making such a big deal about minor inconveniences. Mom pointed out that I'd always been adaptable, that I'd never been the type to make demands or create problems. Why was I choosing now to be difficult? I left for work feeling frustrated and misunderstood, but also oddly clarified. The conversation had revealed something important about how my family saw me and my role in their lives. I was the flexible one, the one who could be counted on to accommodate other people's needs without complaint. My comfort and preferences were secondary considerations, luxuries that could be set aside when more pressing concerns arose. Mr. Henderson noticed my mood when I arrived at the store and asked if everything was okay. I gave him an abbreviated version of the situation, focusing on the practical challenges rather than the emotional ones. He listened thoughtfully, then made an observation that stayed with me for the rest of the day. According to Mr. Henderson, some people went through life assuming that other people would always make room for them, while other people spent their lives making room for everyone else. The first group rarely had to think about accommodation or compromise because they'd learned that someone would always step aside to make their path easier. The second group did most of the stepping aside, often without even realizing they had a choice. I thought about his words while I helped customers and restocked shelves. Was I someone who automatically made room for other people? And if so, when had I learned to do that? The questions felt important, though I wasn't sure yet what to do with the answers. That evening, I came home to find Brandon in an exceptionally good mood. He'd had a breakthrough, he announced, a conversation with an investor who was very interested in his latest concept. The details were confidential, but he could say that it involved sustainable energy and had the potential to revolutionize how people thought about home power consumption. He might need to stay in Riverside a little longer than planned to develop the idea properly, but this could be the opportunity he'd been waiting for. My parents celebrated the news with the enthusiasm of people whose faith in Brandon's eventual success was finally being rewarded. Mom opened a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion, and Dad clapped Brandon on the shoulder with genuine pride. I smiled and offered congratulations, but inside I felt something shift and harden. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and began researching apartments in Riverside. The options were limited and expensive, especially for someone with my income. Most of the decent places required first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit, money I'd been saving for college expenses. Moving out would mean delaying my transfer to Portland State and extending my time at community college. But as I scrolled through listings and calculated costs, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: possibility. Living on my own would mean having my own space again, my own schedule, my own rules. It would mean not having to negotiate for study time or quiet space or basic considerations that I'd taken for granted before Brandon's arrival. I bookmarked several promising apartments and closed the laptop. The decision wasn't final yet, but it was taking shape in my mind like a photograph developing in chemicals, gradually becoming clearer and more defined with each passing moment. The next few days brought a subtle but important shift in my perspective. Instead of hoping that Brandon would leave soon, I began planning for my own departure. I calculated my savings, researched moving costs, and quietly scheduled appointments to view apartments. The process felt both exciting and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing I had the option to jump. Jessica noticed the change first. My sister had always been more perceptive than our parents when it came to reading emotional undercurrents, and she cornered me in the laundry room on Saturday morning while I was folding clothes. She asked directly if I was okay, noting that I'd seemed distant lately. When I told her about my apartment search, her reaction surprised me. Instead of trying to talk me out of it or reminding me about family obligations, she nodded thoughtfully and asked practical questions about my timeline and budget. Jessica had moved out 2 years earlier when she started her nursing program, renting a small studio apartment near the hospital where she worked. She understood the financial challenges and the emotional complexity of leaving home, and she offered to help me look at places if I wanted company. Her support meant more to me than I'd expected. For weeks, I'd felt like the only person who saw anything wrong with the current arrangement, like I was being unreasonable for wanting my own space back. Having Jessica acknowledge that my feelings were valid and my plans were sensible helped me trust my own judgment. We spent Sunday afternoon visiting 3 different apartments. The first was too expensive, the second too small, but the third felt right as soon as I walked through the door. It was a 1-bedroom unit in a small complex near downtown, with hardwood floors and large windows that filled the space with natural light. The rent was manageable if I picked up extra shifts at the hardware store, and the landlord, Mrs. Chen, seemed genuinely interested in finding a responsible tenant rather than just collecting a deposit. I filled out an application that afternoon and left with a cautiously optimistic feeling about my prospects. Mrs. Chen said she'd call within a few days with her decision, and in the meantime, I continued my normal routine while privately preparing for a major change. Brandon's latest venture was progressing slowly, which seemed to be a pattern with his projects. The confident enthusiasm of earlier in the week had given way to frustration with bureaucratic delays and investor timelines. He spent increasing amounts of time on phone calls that grew progressively more heated, pacing around the house while arguing with people about contracts and deadlines and market opportunities. His mood affected the entire household. Mom worried about his stress levels and made his favorite meals in an attempt to cheer him up. Dad offered unsolicited advice about business strategies and perseverance that Brandon accepted politely, but clearly found irritating. The house felt charged with tension, everyone walking carefully around Brandon's disappointment and trying not to do anything that might make his situation worse. I found myself spending more time away from home, picking up extra shifts when possible and studying at the library instead of trying to work around Brandon's schedule and mood swings. The distance helped me see the situation more clearly, and what I saw wasn't encouraging. Brandon wasn't just staying with us temporarily while he got back on his feet. He was settling in, becoming comfortable with an arrangement that met his needs perfectly while requiring nothing from him except the performance of occasional optimism about his prospects. Mrs. Chen called on Wednesday with good news. My application had been approved, and I could move in at the end of the month if I wanted the apartment. She needed a decision by Friday, along with first month's rent and a security deposit. I told her I'd call back the next day, then spent the evening running final calculations and wrestling with doubts that felt both reasonable and self-sabotaging. Moving out would use most of my savings and delay my college plans. But staying meant continuing to live in a situation that was slowly eroding my sense of autonomy and self-respect. The decision became clear when I came home Thursday night to find Brandon hosting a small party in the living room. 3 of his friends from high school were there, drinking beer and playing video games on the television while music played from a Bluetooth speaker. My study materials were pushed aside to make room for pizza boxes and empty bottles, and the folding table where I did homework had been moved against the wall to create more seating. Brandon looked up when I walked in and waved cheerfully, inviting me to join them. His friends greeted me with the casual friendliness of people who assumed I lived there by choice rather than circumstance. One of them complimented the house, saying it was cool that Brandon had found such a comfortable place to land while he worked on his business ventures. I smiled and made polite conversation for a few minutes, then gathered my things and went upstairs to use Jessica's old room for studying. But even there, I could hear the noise from below, the laughter and conversation of people who felt completely at home in a space that had never really been mine to begin with. I called Mrs. Chen the next morning and accepted the apartment. The relief I felt was immediate and overwhelming, like setting down a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I arranged to pick up keys the following Monday and scheduled a moving truck for the weekend. Telling my family about my decision proved more complicated than finding an apartment. I waited until Sunday dinner, when everyone was gathered around, the table in what seemed like a good mood. Brandon had heard back from his investor contact and was optimistic about moving forward with contracts and development timelines. My parents were pleased with his progress and hopeful that his stay with us was finally serving its intended purpose. I waited until the conversation reached a natural pause, then announced that I'd found an apartment and would be moving out at the end of the week. The reaction was swift and completely predictable. Mom's face fell into the expression of hurt disappointment she used when she felt personally betrayed by someone's choices. Dad frowned and asked practical questions about my finances and whether I'd really thought through the implications of living alone. Jessica, who already knew about my plans, offered to help with the actual moving process. Brandon looked genuinely confused, as if he couldn't understand why I'd want to leave when things were finally getting interesting with his business prospects. He asked if this was about him staying in my room, because he'd be happy to switch back once his investor meetings were finished, and he had his own place lined up. I explained that it wasn't about blame or anger, just about needing my own space and independence. I was 22 years old and had never lived anywhere except my childhood home. It felt like the right time to try something new, to see what I could accomplish on my own. The conversation continued for another hour, with various family members offering alternatives and compromises that might address my concerns without requiring such a drastic change. Mom suggested we could set up a schedule for the living room, ensuring I had guaranteed study time without interruption. Dad wondered if we could convert part of the basement into a temporary bedroom that would give me more privacy. Brandon offered to pay for half of a storage unit where I could keep my belongings until he moved out. All of their suggestions were reasonable and well-intentioned, but they missed the fundamental point. I didn't want to negotiate for space in my family's house anymore. I wanted my own space, my own rules, my own life. The difference felt enormous to me, but I could see that it was difficult for them to understand. Moving day arrived with unseasonable warmth for late October, the kind of perfect fall weather that made physical labor almost pleasant. Tyler arrived early with his pickup truck, and Jessica came over after her shift at the hospital to help load boxes. My parents offered assistance, but seemed uncertain about how to help with something they still hoped I might reconsider. Brandon slept until noon, emerging from what had been my bedroom just as we finished loading the last of my furniture. He offered to help with the actual move, but everything was already packed and ready to go. Instead, he stood in the driveway, waving goodbye as we drove away, my entire adult life fitting easily into one small truck and Jessica's sedan. The new apartment felt enormous after weeks of living in the corner of my family's living room. I spent the first evening arranging furniture and unpacking boxes, creating a space that reflected my preferences and priorities. I set up my desk under the large window in the bedroom, positioned my bookshelf where I could see it from the couch, and hung the few pieces of art I'd collected over the years. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in 2 months. The silence felt luxurious after weeks of adapting to other people's schedules and noise levels. I could study when I wanted, eat what I chose, watch television or read, or just sit quietly without considering anyone else's needs or preferences. The adjustment to living alone was easier than I'd expected. I established new routines quickly, grocery shopping for one and cooking simple meals that didn't require accommodation for other people's tastes. I picked up extra shifts at the hardware store to cover my increased expenses, and I found that I actually enjoyed the additional responsibility and structure. Mr. Henderson officially promoted me to assistant manager in November, with a raise that made my new living situation more financially comfortable. The promotion came with additional duties, and the opportunity to learn more about the business side of retail operations, skills that complemented my business coursework and gave me practical experience with inventory management and customer service. I still saw my family regularly, usually for Sunday dinners and occasional holidays. The initial tension around my moving out had faded into acceptance, and most of our interactions felt normal and comfortable. Brandon was still staying in my old room, though his latest business venture seemed to be proceeding slowly. He'd signed some kind of preliminary agreement with his investor contact, but the actual development work was taking longer than anticipated. Winter passed quietly, with me settling into rhythms of work and school that felt sustainable and purposeful. I was taking a full course load at the community college and maintaining excellent grades while working nearly full-time at the hardware store. The balance was challenging but manageable, and I was on track to transfer to Portland State in the fall with enough credits to start as a junior. Spring brought unexpected opportunities. A commercial real estate agent named Maria Santos came into the hardware store looking for supplies for a renovation project, and we struck up a conversation about property investment and development. She was impressed by my knowledge of construction, materials, and my understanding of project costs, skills I'd developed through 3 years of helping contractors and DIY customers find solutions to their building challenges. Maria mentioned that her agency was looking for someone with both construction knowledge and business acumen to work part-time as a property assessor, evaluating potential investment properties for structural soundness and renovation costs. The job paid well and offered flexible scheduling that would work around my college classes. She gave me her card and suggested I call if I was interested in learning more. I researched the position thoroughly before calling Maria back. Property assessment seemed like a natural extension of skills I already had, and the real estate industry offered long-term career opportunities that aligned with my business studies. Maria invited me to shadow her on a few property visits to see if the work suited me, and I was immediately fascinated by the process of evaluating buildings for investment potential. The job required learning new skills, but Maria was an excellent teacher who explained both the technical aspects of property assessment and the business considerations that drove investment decisions. I learned to spot structural problems that might be expensive to repair, to estimate renovation costs based on current material and labor prices, and to evaluate neighborhoods for growth potential and market trends. Within a few months, I was working regularly as Maria's assistant, spending my free time visiting properties and writing assessment reports. The work paid significantly better than my hardware store job, and it offered insights into wealth building that weren't covered in my college coursework. Maria encouraged me to consider getting my real estate license after graduation, pointing out that the combination of construction knowledge and business education would make me valuable in commercial property markets. I began to see real estate not just as a career opportunity, but as a path to financial independence. Maria introduced me to the concept of house hacking, where someone buys a small multi-unit property, lives in one unit, and rents out the others to cover mortgage payments. She showed me examples of young investors who'd built substantial portfolios by starting with duplex or triplex properties and reinvesting rental income into additional purchases. The idea appealed to me on multiple levels. Real estate offered the possibility of passive income and long-term wealth building, but it also represented a form of security that I'd never had growing up. Owning property meant having control over my living situation, never again having to negotiate for space or worry about other people's decisions affecting my home. I started researching the local real estate market seriously, learning about property values and rental rates in different neighborhoods around Riverside. The numbers were encouraging. Several duplex properties in decent neighborhoods were listed at prices that would be manageable with a modest down payment and investment loan, and rental rates would easily cover mortgage payments with room for profit and property maintenance. My 23rd birthday passed quietly, marked by dinner with Tyler and a phone call from Jessica, rather than the family celebrations of previous years. The distance felt natural rather than lonely, a reflection of how much my priorities and perspective had changed over the past year. I was focused on school and work and building toward a future that felt increasingly clear and achievable. Summer brought another opportunity that would prove significant later. Maria's agency was hired to assess a portfolio of distressed properties for an investment group, and she asked me to help with the project. Most of the properties were residential homes in various stages of foreclosure or tax delinquency, purchased by investors who planned to renovate and either rent or resell them. The work was intensive but educational, requiring detailed evaluation of dozens of properties across several neighborhoods. I learned to quickly identify the difference between cosmetic problems that were easy to fix and structural issues that might make a property unsuitable for investment. I also learned about the foreclosure process, how properties ended up in distressed sales, and what opportunities existed for investors willing to take on challenging renovations. One of the properties in the portfolio was a 2-story colonial on Maple Street, just 3 blocks from my childhood home. The house had been abandoned for several months after the previous owners defaulted on their mortgage, and it showed signs of neglect that would require significant investment to address. But the bones of the structure were solid, and the neighborhood was stable with good schools and established families. I wrote a thorough assessment report noting the property's potential for renovation and long-term rental income, but I also found myself thinking about it personally. The house was similar in size and layout to my family's home, and it was located in a neighborhood I knew well. With proper renovation, it would make an excellent rental property or even a potential primary residence. Maria noticed my interest and suggested I consider making an offer myself. She could help me structure a deal that would work with my limited capital, and she knew lenders who specialized in investment loans for first-time buyers. The property was priced aggressively low due to its condition, making it a potentially excellent investment for someone willing to put in renovation work. I spent several evenings running numbers and considering possibilities. The purchase would require using most of my savings for a down payment, and I'd need to secure financing for both the purchase price and renovation costs. But the potential returns were substantial, and the property could serve as both an investment and a stepping stone toward building a larger real estate portfolio. After considerable research and consultation with Maria, I decided to make an offer. The negotiation process was surprisingly straightforward, largely because few other investors were interested in taking on such an extensive renovation project. My offer was accepted within a week, contingent on securing appropriate financing and completing a professional inspection. The loan application process was more complex than I'd anticipated, requiring extensive documentation of my income, assets, and investment plans. But my employment history, credit rating, and detailed renovation budget impressed the lenders Maria recommended, and I was approved for a combination purchase and rehabilitation loan that would cover both the acquisition and improvement costs. Closing on my first property felt surreal and overwhelming. At 23, I was suddenly responsible for a mortgage, property taxes, insurance, and a renovation project that would require months of work before generating any income. But I was also the owner of a real asset, something tangible that represented security and opportunity in ways that rent payments and paychecks never could. The renovation work began immediately, with Maria helping me coordinate contractors and manage the project timeline. We focused on essential repairs first, updating electrical and plumbing systems, replacing the roof, and addressing foundation issues that could cause problems later. The cosmetic improvements would come after the structural work was completed, safely and properly. I spent most of my free time at the property, learning construction skills and helping with work that didn't require professional expertise. I painted walls, installed fixtures, and handled cleanup tasks that saved money on contractor labor. The physical work was satisfying in a way that surprised me, creating visible progress toward a goal that felt entirely my own. By early fall, the renovation was nearly complete. The The house had been transformed from a neglected foreclosure property into an attractive rental that would appeal to families or professionals looking for comfortable housing in a good neighborhood. Maria helped me research rental rates and prepare marketing materials, and we scheduled the first showing for the weekend after I received my certificate of occupancy. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. 3 families applied for the rental within the first week, each offering to pay the full asking price and providing excellent references from previous landlords. I selected a young couple with steady employment and no pets, people who seemed likely to take good care of the property and stay for an extended period. Collecting my first rental payment felt like crossing an invisible threshold into a different category of financial security. The rental income covered my mortgage payment with several $100s left over for property maintenance and personal profit. More importantly, I now owned an asset that was likely to appreciate in value while generating monthly income, creating wealth in multiple ways simultaneously. I was so focused on the excitement of becoming a landlord that I almost missed the significance of the address. 1247 Maple Street, the same street where I'd grown up, just 3 blocks from my family's house. The coincidence seemed poetic rather than concerning, a symbol of how much my life had changed and how far I'd traveled while staying geographically close to home. The success of my first investment property encouraged me to start looking for additional opportunities. Maria helped me identify other distressed properties that might work for similar renovation projects, and I began building relationships with contractors and suppliers who could help me scale up my real estate activities while maintaining quality and cost control. By winter, I was ready to make an offer on a second property, a duplex in another part of town that would generate twice the rental income of my single-family house. The financing was easier to secure the second time, with my existing property serving as collateral and my track record demonstrating competence as a real estate investor. I also made another significant decision. I applied to Portland State University for their business program, planning to complete my degree while continuing to build my real estate portfolio. The combination of practical investment experience and formal business education would position me well for long-term success in property development and management. My family seemed both impressed and puzzled by my rapid transition from hardware store employee to real estate investor. They attended a small celebration dinner when the Portland State acceptance letter arrived on a Thursday morning in February, thick and official-looking in my mailbox. I held it for a moment before opening it, knowing that whatever was inside would determine the trajectory of the next 2 years of my life. The word "congratulations" jumped out at me from the first line, and I felt a surge of pride mixed with nervous anticipation about what came next. I'd been accepted into their business program with junior standing, exactly as I'd hoped. My community, college credits transferred seamlessly, and my GPA qualified me for partial scholarship assistance that would help offset the higher tuition costs. The program was designed for working students, with evening classes and weekend seminars that would allow me to maintain my real estate activities while completing my degree. Maria was thrilled when I shared the news, pointing out that the business program would complement my practical experience perfectly. She'd been encouraging me to think beyond individual property investments toward larger development projects, and the education would provide the theoretical framework and professional credibility needed for that kind of work. My parents' reaction was more complicated. They were proud of my academic achievement, but they seemed concerned about my decision to commute to Portland rather than moving closer to campus. Mom worried about the drive, especially during winter weather, and Dad questioned whether I was taking on too much responsibility between school, work, and property management. I assured them that I'd thought through the logistics carefully. The drive to Portland was manageable, especially since most of my classes were scheduled for evenings and weekends. My rental properties were generating enough income to cover my living expenses and tuition, giving me financial independence that made the commute worthwhile. I'd built a life in Riverside that I didn't want to abandon for the convenience of campus housing. Brandon, who was still living in my old bedroom, offered congratulations that felt genuinely enthusiastic. His own business ventures had evolved into a consulting practice that kept him busy but didn't seem to generate much income. He talked about my success in real estate with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment, as if he couldn't quite understand how I'd managed to build something substantial while he was still chasing breakthrough opportunities. The spring semester at Portland State was challenging but invigorating. My business courses covered financial analysis, marketing strategy, and organizational management topics that directly related to my real estate activities. I found myself applying classroom concepts to my properties immediately, using new frameworks to evaluate investment opportunities and optimize rental operations. One of my professors, Dr. Rebecca Walsh, taught a course on entrepreneurship that particularly resonated with my experience. She encouraged students to think systematically about wealth building and business development, emphasizing the importance of creating multiple income streams and building assets that generated passive revenue. Her lectures reinforced strategies I'd discovered through trial and error, while introducing new concepts that expanded my understanding of business principles. Dr. Walsh noticed my engagement with the material and asked me to stay after class one evening to discuss my real estate activities. She was impressed by what I'd accomplished in such a short time, especially starting with limited capital and no family connections in the industry. She suggested I consider writing a case study about my experience for a student entrepreneurship competition she was organizing. The competition intrigued me, both for the potential recognition and the prize money that could fund additional property acquisitions. I spent several weeks developing a presentation about my transition from hardware store employee to real estate investor, focusing on the strategic decisions and financial management that had made my success possible. The case study required detailed analysis of my investment returns, renovation costs, and market research process. As I compiled the information, I was surprised by how much I'd learned and accomplished in less than 2 years. My portfolio now included 3 rental properties generating consistent monthly income, and I had a clear plan for expanding into larger multifamily developments within the next 5 years. The competition presentation went well, with judges asking thoughtful questions about my financing strategies and long-term business goals. I didn't win first place, but I received recognition for innovation and practical application of business principles, along with a modest cash prize that went directly into my renovation fund for the next property purchase. More importantly, the presentation caught the attention of several local investors and business leaders who attended the competition as judges and mentors. One of them, a commercial real estate developer named Robert Chen, approached me afterward to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Robert had been developing properties in the Portland metro area for over 20 years, focusing on mixed-use projects that combined residential and commercial space. He was impressed by my analytical approach and hands-on experience with renovation projects, skills that were valuable for his development work but difficult to find in recent graduates. He offered me a part-time position as a project analyst, working on feasibility studies and financial modeling for potential developments. The job would provide exposure to larger-scale real estate projects while allowing me to continue my education and personal investments. The salary was excellent, significantly more than I'd been earning through property assessment work. I accepted Robert's offer immediately, recognizing it as exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been hoping to find. Working for an established developer would teach me about complex financing structures, regulatory processes, and project management techniques that would be invaluable for my own future developments. The summer between my junior and senior years was intensive and educational. I spent most of my time working on Robert's projects, analyzing potential developments in various neighborhoods around Portland and the surrounding suburbs. The work required detailed financial modeling, market research, and site evaluation skills that built directly on my previous experience, but at a much more sophisticated level. One project in particular captured my attention: a mixed-use development in a transitioning neighborhood that combined affordable housing units with ground-floor retail space. The project required significant upfront investment, but offered the potential for substantial long-term returns through rental income and property appreciation. Robert was exploring various financing options for the development, including partnerships with local government agencies and community development organizations. The complexity of the deal structure was fascinating, involving tax credits, low-interest loans, and equity partnerships that made the project financially viable while serving community needs. I contributed analysis showing how similar developments in other cities had performed over time, including occupancy rates, rental income trends, and property value appreciation. My research supported Robert's instincts about the project's potential, and the development moved forward with financing approvals and construction permits. Working on the mixed-use project gave me insights into how real estate development could serve broader social and economic purposes beyond simple profit generation. The affordable housing component addressed genuine community needs, while the akastataid retail space would create jobs and contribute to neighborhood revitalization. The financial returns were attractive, but the social impact made the project particularly meaningful. By the end of summer, I'd learned enough about complex development projects to start considering similar opportunities on a smaller scale. My individual rental properties were performing well, but I was ready to take on more ambitious projects that would generate higher returns and contribute more significantly to community development. Robert recognized my growing expertise and offered me a full-time position after graduation, with the understanding that I could continue my personal real estate activities as long as they didn't conflict with company projects. The offer was generous and represented exactly the kind of career opportunity I'd been working towards since starting college. My senior year passed quickly, filled with advanced coursework, thesis research, and continued work on Robert's development projects. I wrote my senior thesis on small-scale community development, analyzing how individual investors could contribute to neighborhood revitalization while building personal wealth. The research drew heavily on my practical experience and provided a theoretical framework for future investment decisions. Dr. Walsh served as my thesis advisor and was impressed by the depth of my analysis and the practical applications of academic concepts. She encouraged me to consider graduate school, suggesting that an MBA would position me well for leadership roles in real estate development and urban planning. The idea of graduate school appealed to me, but I was also eager to apply what I'd learned in larger-scale projects. Robert had hinted at potential partnership opportunities that would allow me to develop properties independently while maintaining access to his financing networks and development expertise. Graduation day arrived in May, warm and sunny with the kind of perfect weather that made everything feel possible. My parents, Jessica and Tyler, attended the ceremony, all beaming with pride as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma. Even Brandon made the drive to Portland, wearing a suit that looked slightly too small but expressing genuine enthusiasm for my achievement. The celebration dinner afterward was one of the most pleasant family gatherings I could remember in years. Everyone seemed relaxed and happy, focusing on positive achievements rather than problems or conflicts. Brandon talked about his latest consulting project with optimism that felt more realistic than his previous venture descriptions, and my parents seemed genuinely proud of both my academic success and my real estate accomplishments. Robert attended the graduation ceremony as well, having become something of a mentor over the past year. He used the occasion to formally offer me a partnership opportunity he'd been developing, a chance to co-invest in a duplex renovation project that would serve as a pilot for larger collaborative developments. The partnership structure was elegant and educational. Robert would provide the majority of the financing and development expertise, while I would contribute the hands-on project management and renovation oversight. We'd split the profits proportionally, based on our investment contributions, and the project would serve as a model for future collaborations. I accepted the partnership immediately, recognizing it as exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been hoping to find. Working directly with Robert would accelerate my learning about complex development projects while providing access to financing and professional networks that would be difficult to develop independently. The duplex project began in earnest that summer, with Robert handling the acquisition and permitting processes while I managed the renovation work. The property was located in a neighborhood similar to where I'd grown up, with solid infrastructure and good schools, but housing stock that needed updating to attract young families and professionals. The renovation was more extensive than my previous projects, involving structural modifications to create more open floor plans and modern amenities that would appeal to contemporary renters. Robert introduced me to contractors and suppliers who specialized in quality work at reasonable prices, relationships that would be valuable for future projects. The project also required more sophisticated financial management than I'd previously handled. Robert taught me about construction loans, draw schedules, and cost accounting methods that ensured the renovation stayed within budget while maintaining quality standards. The education was invaluable, providing practical skills that weren't covered in my academic coursework. By early fall, the duplex renovation was nearly complete and generating significant interest from potential tenants. The modern finishes and efficient layouts appealed to exactly the demographic we'd targeted, and we were able to set rental rates that would provide excellent returns on our investment. The success of the duplex project led to discussions about larger-scale collaborations, including a potential apartment complex development that would combine affordable and market-rate units. Robert was exploring various financing options and regulatory incentives that would make such a project financially viable while serving community housing needs. I was excited about the possibility of working on larger projects, but I was also aware that my personal real estate portfolio needed attention. My individual properties were performing well, but I wanted to expand my holdings in strategic ways that would complement my professional development work. Maria had been monitoring the local real estate market and identified several properties that might work for my investment strategy. One in particular caught my attention, a small apartment building in need of renovation but located in a neighborhood with strong long-term growth potential. The building contained 6 units, currently generating modest rental income but with the potential for significant improvement through strategic renovations and better management. The seller was motivated to close quickly, creating an opportunity to acquire the property at a favorable price. I spent several weeks analyzing the investment potential, including renovation costs, financing options, and projected rental income. After improvements, the numbers looked promising, especially if I could secure favorable financing terms and manage the renovation work efficiently. The apartment building purchase would require a significant financial commitment, using most of my available capital and taking on substantial debt. But it would also represent a major step forward in building my real estate portfolio, providing multiple income streams and the potential for substantial long-term appreciation. After extensive analysis and consultation with both Maria and Robert, I decided to make an offer on the apartment building. The negotiation process was more complex than my previous purchases, involving multiple counteroffers and detailed discussions about property conditions and financing contingencies. My offer was eventually accepted, contingent on securing appropriate financing and completing satisfactory inspections. The closing process took several months, requiring extensive documentation and coordination between multiple lenders, inspectors, and legal representatives. During the closing process, I learned that the property had an interesting history. It had been built in the 1960s as workforce housing for employees of a local manufacturing company, and it had changed hands several times as the neighborhood evolved and the local economy shifted toward service industries. The building's previous owner had been an elderly woman who inherited it from her parents and had been managing it herself for over 30 years. She was selling because she could no longer handle the physical demands of property management, and she wanted to ensure the building would be well maintained by someone who understood its value to the community. Her story resonated with me, reinforcing my sense that real estate investment carried responsibilities beyond simple profit generation. The building provided affordable housing for working families, and my goal was to improve the property while keeping it accessible to people who needed quality housing at reasonable prices. The closing finally took place in early December, making me the owner of my largest and most complex investment property. The building required immediate attention to several maintenance issues, but the underlying structure was sound, and the location was excellent for long-term appreciation. I spent the first few weeks after closing assessing the property thoroughly and developing a comprehensive renovation plan. The building needed new flooring, updated kitchens and bathrooms, improved lighting, and better insulation for energy efficiency. The work would take several months, but would significantly increase both the property's value and its rental income potential. The renovation project began in January, with Robert providing advice and contractor recommendations based on his experience with similar properties. The work was more complex than my previous projects, requiring coordination between multiple trades and careful scheduling to minimize disruption for existing tenants. I decided to renovate units as they became vacant rather than displacing current tenants, a decision that extended the project timeline but preserved rental income and maintained good relationships with long-term residents. The approach required more complex project management, but aligned with my values about responsible property ownership. The first renovated unit was completed in March and immediately attracted high-quality tenants willing to pay premium rent for the updated amenities and modern finishes. The rental increase more than justified the renovation costs and provided a clear model for improving the remaining units. By spring, 3 units had been renovated and re-rented at significantly higher rates, while the other 3 were occupied by existing tenants who were satisfied with more modest improvements like fresh paint and new appliances. The building was generating substantially more income than when I'd purchased it, and the property value had increased considerably. The success of the apartment building project established me as a serious real estate investor in the local market. Other property owners began approaching me about potential acquisitions, and I was developing a reputation for quality renovations and responsible tenant management. Robert was impressed by my progress and proposed a larger partnership opportunity, a mixed-use development project that would combine retail, office, and residential space in a downtown location. The project would require significant capital investment, but offered the potential for exceptional returns and substantial community impact. The mixed-use development was exactly the kind of project I'd been hoping to work on, combining my interests in real estate investment, community development, and urban planning. The project would require extensive planning, financing, and construction management, but it represented a significant step forward in my professional development. As I considered Robert's proposal, I realized how much my life had changed since that morning 3 years earlier when Brandon had called asking for a place to stay. I'd transformed from a hardware store employee living in my childhood bedroom to a real estate investor and developer with a growing portfolio and exciting professional opportunities. The transformation hadn't been accidental or easy. It had required careful planning, strategic decision-making, and the willingness to take calculated risks when opportunities presented themselves. Most importantly, it had required the confidence to prioritize my own goals and values even when they conflicted with other people's expectations. I was preparing to respond to Robert's partnership proposal when I received an unexpected phone call that would change everything. The caller was Mrs. Patterson, an elderly neighbor who had lived on Maple Street for over 40 years. She apologized for bothering me, but said she had information she thought I should know about my family's house. According to Mrs. Patterson, my parents had been struggling financially for several months. Dad had been laid off from his job at the shipping company, and Mom's part-time work at the department store wasn't enough to cover their mortgage payments and other expenses. They'd been trying to resolve the situation quietly, but she'd noticed several official-looking notices in their mailbox and was worried about their circumstances. The news was shocking and concerning. My parents had always been private about their finances, and they'd given no indication during our regular family dinners that they were facing serious problems. I thanked Mrs. Patterson for the information and promised to look into the situation discreetly. I spent the rest of the day researching public records and trying to understand what might be happening with my family's house. What I discovered was worse than I'd expected. My parents were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments, and the bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings. Without immediate intervention, they would lose the house within a matter of weeks. The foreclosure notices were public records, but my parents had apparently been keeping the situation secret from everyone, including Brandon, who was still living in my former bedroom. The financial crisis had been building for months, starting with Dad's job loss and escalating as they'd depleted their savings trying to maintain their lifestyle. I was torn between feeling sorry for my parents' situation and frustrated by their failure to ask for help or even acknowledge the problem. They'd always been proud and independent, reluctant to accept assistance even when it was offered freely. But their pride was about to cost them their home, and Brandon's presence in the house meant he would be affected by the foreclosure as well. The next few days were spent researching options and trying to understand exactly what would be required to resolve the situation. The mortgage company was willing to work with my parents if they could bring the loan current and demonstrate ability to maintain future payments, but that would require immediate access to significant funds. I calculated that resolving the mortgage arrearage would require approximately $15,000, plus ongoing monthly payments that were higher than my parents' current income. Even if I provided the funds to bring the loan current, they would need additional income or financial assistance to prevent future defaults. The situation was complicated by Brandon's presence in the house. He was contributing nothing to the household expenses while occupying the bedroom that I'd previously paid rent for. His continued stay was effectively increasing my parents' financial burden while providing him with free housing during his extended job search. I considered various approaches to helping my parents, from providing a direct loan to offering to take over their mortgage payments. But all of the options required them to acknowledge their situation and ask for help, something they seemed determined to avoid. After several sleepless nights weighing my options, I decided on a different approach. Instead of trying to help my parents directly, I would work with the mortgage company to purchase the house myself, assuming the loan and taking over the payments. The arrangement would allow my parents to remain in the house as tenants while protecting them from foreclosure and providing me with another rental property. The plan was complex and would require careful negotiation with the mortgage company, but it offered advantages for everyone involved. My parents would avoid foreclosure and maintain their housing stability. I would acquire a property in a neighborhood I knew well, and Brandon would finally be forced to confront the reality of his living situation. I contacted the mortgage company to explore the possibility of assuming the loan or purchasing the property through a short sale arrangement. The initial conversations were promising, with the lender expressing interest in working with a qualified buyer who could resolve the situation quickly and avoid the costs and delays of foreclosure proceedings. The negotiation process took several weeks, involving extensive financial documentation and legal review of the proposed transaction structure. The mortgage company was ultimately willing to allow me to assume the loan at current market rates, with my parents remaining as tenants under a formal lease agreement. The arrangement would require my parents' cooperation and agreement to the new terms, something I hadn't yet discussed with them. I was nervous about their reaction, knowing they would be embarrassed about their financial situation and potentially resistant to accepting help from their daughter. I decided to approach the conversation directly and honestly, explaining what I'd learned about their situation and outlining the solution I'd developed. I arranged to meet them at their house on a Saturday morning when Brandon would be out, ensuring we could discuss the situation privately. My parents' reaction was exactly what I'd expected, a mixture of embarrassment, defensiveness, and reluctant gratitude. They were mortified that I'd discovered their financial problems and initially resistant to the idea of becoming my tenants. But as I explained the alternatives and the timeline for potential foreclosure, they gradually acknowledged that my proposal was their best option. The conversation was difficult and emotional, touching on years of family dynamics and assumptions. about independence and responsibility. My parents had always seen themselves as the providers and protectors, and accepting help from their adult daughter challenged their sense of identity and control. I tried to frame the arrangement as a business transaction rather than charity, emphasizing that the house would be a good investment for me while providing them with stable housing. The approach seemed to make the situation more acceptable for them, allowing them to maintain some dignity while accepting the assistance they needed. The legal and financial arrangements were finalized within a month, with me officially taking ownership of the house and my parents signing a lease agreement that gave them tenant rights and responsibilities. The rent was set at a level they could afford with their current income, and I assumed all maintenance and repair responsibilities as the property owner. Brandon's reaction to the news was stunned silence, followed by a series of questions about how the arrangement would affect his living situation. I explained that as the new owner, I would be setting house rules and expectations for all residents, including guests who stayed for extended periods. The conversation with Brandon was awkward but necessary. I made it clear that his continued stay in the house would require him to contribute to household expenses and maintain the property appropriately. If he preferred to make other living arrangements, I would give him reasonable notice to find alternative housing. Brandon chose to move out within 2 weeks, finally acknowledging that his extended stay had become unsustainable. He found a small apartment across town and began taking his job search more seriously, eventually finding steady employment with a local marketing firm. With Brandon gone, my parents settled into their new roles as tenants in the house they'd owned for over 20 years. The transition was challenging emotionally, but the financial relief was immediate and significant. They no longer worried about mortgage payments or property taxes, and they had a responsive landlord who maintained the property well. I made several improvements to the house over the following months, updating the kitchen appliances and bathroom fixtures while addressing deferred maintenance issues that my parents hadn't been able to afford. The renovations increased the property's value while making it more comfortable and efficient for my parents to live in. The experience of becoming my parents' landlord was strange and sometimes awkward, but it also felt like a natural extension of the real estate investment skills I'd been developing. I treated them fairly and professionally while maintaining appropriate boundaries between our family relationship and business arrangement. More importantly, the situation had forced my family to confront dynamics and assumptions that had been problematic for years. My parents gained a new understanding of my capabilities and accomplishments, while I established myself as an adult who could provide solutions to serious problems rather than simply accommodating other people's needs. The success of the family house acquisition gave me confidence to pursue Robert's mixed-use development proposal with renewed enthusiasm. I now owned a diverse portfolio of rental properties generating consistent income, and I had demonstrated the ability to handle complex real estate transactions under challenging circumstances. I called Robert to accept his partnership proposal, ready to take on the most ambitious project of my career. The mixed-use development would combine everything I'd learned about real estate investment, community development, and professional collaboration into a single project that could transform a downtown neighborhood while generating substantial returns. As I prepared to sign the partnership agreement, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. 3 years earlier, I'd been sleeping on my parents' couch, displaced by a cousin who needed temporary housing. Now, I was a property owner and developer with a growing portfolio and exciting professional opportunities ahead. The transformation hadn't been easy or straightforward, but it had been worth every challenge and setback along the way. I'd learned to trust my own judgment, pursue my own goals, and create the kind of life I wanted, rather than simply accepting whatever circumstances other people created for me. Most importantly, I'd discovered that real estate investment wasn't just about building wealth or generating income. It was about creating stability, opportunity, and community value through responsible property ownership and development. The work aligned with my values and interests in ways that felt sustainable and meaningful for the long term. Standing in my childhood bedroom, now empty and ready for the next chapter of the house's history, I felt a sense of completion and anticipation that was both satisfying and exciting. The room where I'd once felt displaced and unimportant had become the foundation for a real estate portfolio that would provide security and opportunity for years to come. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd become the landlord of the house, where I'd once paid rent for a bedroom, only to have it given away to someone else. But the situation felt like justice rather than revenge, a natural consequence of the choices and priorities that had shaped my family's financial decisions over the years. I locked the front door of 1247 Maple Street and walked to my car, ready to begin the next phase of my real estate career with Robert's mixed-use development project. The future felt full of possibility and potential, built on the solid foundation of properties, relationships, and experiences that had transformed me from a displaced young woman into a confident real estate investor and developer. The mixed-use development project with Robert began in earnest that fall, consuming most of my attention and energy for the better part of 6 months. The property was located in downtown Riverside, a 3-story brick building that had once housed a department store on the ground floor with offices above. The structure was solid but outdated, requiring extensive renovation to transform it into modern retail and residential space. Robert's vision for the project was ambitious and forward-thinking. The ground floor would be converted into flexible retail space that could accommodate multiple small businesses, while the upper floors would become loft-style apartments appealing to young professionals and creative types who wanted to live in the city center. The combination would create a vibrant, mixed-use environment that would contribute to downtown revitalization while generating strong rental income. My role in the project was multifaceted, combining project management, financial analysis, and hands-on renovation oversight. Robert handled the complex financing arrangements and regulatory approvals, while I managed the day-to-day construction work and coordinated with contractors and suppliers. The division of responsibilities played to our respective strengths while ensuring that every aspect of the development received appropriate attention. The renovation work was more complex than anything I'd previously undertaken, requiring coordination between multiple specialized contractors and careful sequencing of different construction phases. We needed to completely rebuild the interior spaces while preserving the building's historic character and complying with modern building codes and accessibility requirements. The electrical and plumbing systems required complete replacement, involving extensive work behind walls and ceilings that had to be coordinated with structural modifications and cosmetic improvements. The HVAC system needed to be designed for mixed commercial and residential use, requiring equipment and ductwork that could handle different heating and cooling needs efficiently. I found myself learning new skills constantly, from understanding complex building codes to managing construction schedules and budgets. Robert was an excellent mentor, sharing decades of development experience while allowing me to take on increasing responsibility as the project progressed. The learning curve was steep but exhilarating, expanding my understanding of real estate development far beyond what I'd gained from smaller residential projects. One of the most challenging aspects of the project was working with the city planning department to secure the necessary permits and approvals for the mixed-use conversion. The building had been zoned for commercial use, and changing it to allow residential units required extensive documentation and community input processes that took months to complete. The planning hearings were educational but frustrating, involving presentations to various boards and committees that seemed to focus more on procedural details than substantive issues. I learned to navigate bureaucratic processes with patience and persistence, developing relationships with city staff members who could provide guidance and expedite approvals when possible. The community input process was more positive, with most neighbors expressing support for the renovation project and the economic activity it would bring to the downtown area. Several local business owners attended the hearings to voice their approval, citing the need for more residential units to support downtown retailers and restaurants. The construction work began in earnest once all permits were secured, with the demolition and structural work taking up the first few months of the project timeline. Watching the building's transformation was fascinating and sometimes overwhelming, as walls came down and spaces were reconfigured to create the open, flexible layouts that would define the finished project. I spent most of my time on site during the construction phase, coordinating with contractors and monitoring progress against our schedule and budget. The work required constant problem-solving and decision-making, from minor issues like fixture placement to major challenges like unexpected structural complications that required engineering consultation and design modifications. The retail spaces were completed first, featuring polished concrete floors, exposed brick walls, and large windows that would showcase whatever businesses eventually occupied them. The spaces were designed to be flexible, with minimal built-in features that would allow different types of retailers to customize the areas to their specific needs. Marketing the retail spaces began before construction was finished, with Robert and I meeting with potential tenants to discuss their requirements and timeline for occupancy. The response was encouraging, with several established businesses expressing interest in relocating to the renovated building, and new entrepreneurs inquiring about lease terms and tenant improvement allowances. Our first retail tenant was a coffee shop owner who had been operating in a less desirable location across town. She was excited about the opportunity to move to a more visible downtown location with better foot traffic and parking availability. Her enthusiasm for the project was contagious, reinforcing our confidence that the mixed-use concept would succeed in Riverside's evolving downtown market. The residential units took longer to complete, requiring more detailed finish work and coordination with city inspectors who needed to verify compliance with residential building codes. Each unit was designed as a loft-style apartment with high ceilings, large windows, and open floor plans that maximized the sense of space and light. The apartments featured modern kitchens with stainless steel appliances, updated bathrooms with contemporary fixtures, and in-unit laundry facilities that were essential for attracting professional tenants. The finishes were selected to appeal to young adults who wanted urban living with upscale amenities but couldn't afford luxury developments in larger cities. Pre-leasing for the residential units began while construction was still underway, with prospective tenants touring the building and reserving apartments based on floor plans and sample finishes. The response exceeded our expectations, with most units reserved before the building was ready for occupancy. The mixed-use development was completed on schedule and within budget, an achievement that Robert attributed to careful planning and effective project management. The building opened to considerable community attention, with local media covering the renovation as a symbol of downtown revitalization and economic development. The grand opening celebration was held on a warm Saturday evening in May, with the retail spaces showcasing their new businesses and the residential units available for tours. The event drew several hundred people, including city officials, local business owners, and prospective tenants interested in downtown living options. I felt tremendous pride watching people explore the building and express enthusiasm for what we'd accomplished. The project represented everything I'd been working toward: successful real estate investment, community development, and professional growth combined in a single endeavor that would generate income and create value for years to come. The financial returns from the mixed-use development exceeded our projections, with both retail and residential rents commanding premium rates due to the building's unique character and downtown location. The property was fully occupied within 3 months of opening, generating strong cash flow that justified the extensive renovation investment. More importantly, the project established me as a credible developer in the local real estate market. Other property owners began approaching me about potential renovation projects, and I started receiving invitations to speak at real estate investment seminars and community development forums. Robert was pleased with the project's success and eager to pursue additional collaborations. He had identified several other downtown properties that might work for similar mixed-use developments, and he wanted to establish a formal development partnership that would allow us to take on larger and more complex projects. The partnership proposal was attractive and represented a significant step forward in my real estate career. Working with Robert would provide access to capital expertise, and professional networks that would be difficult to develop independently. The arrangement would also allow me to take on more ambitious projects while maintaining my individual property. Investments. I was considering Robert's partnership proposal when I received another unexpected development opportunity. Maria Santos, my former mentor in property assessment, contacted me about a unique investment possibility that had just come to market. A local family was selling a small apartment complex due to estate settlement issues, and they were motivated to close quickly with minimal contingencies. The apartment complex consisted of 2 buildings with a total of 16 units, located in a neighborhood that was experiencing gradual gentrification and property value appreciation. The buildings were older but well-maintained, generating steady rental income from long-term tenants who were generally satisfied with their housing situation. The asking price was below market value due to the family's desire for a quick sale, creating an opportunity for significant equity gain from the purchase alone. The rental income would cover mortgage payments and operating expenses while providing modest positive cash flow, and the long-term appreciation potential was excellent given the neighborhood's trajectory. The investment would require most of my available capital and would stretch my financing capacity, but the potential returns were compelling. The apartment complex would significantly expand my portfolio while providing diversification across different property types and neighborhoods. I spent several weeks analyzing the investment opportunity, including detailed financial projections, market research, and physical inspection of both buildings. The numbers looked favorable, especially considering the below-market purchase price, and the potential for rental increases as the neighborhood continued to improve. The decision to pursue the apartment complex purchase was complicated by the timing of Robert's partnership proposal. Both opportunities represented significant commitments that would shape my real estate career for years to come, and I needed to choose between them or find a way to pursue both simultaneously. After extensive consideration and consultation with financial advisors, I decided to pursue the apartment complex purchase while negotiating a modified partnership arrangement with Robert. The apartment complex would serve as my primary individual investment, while the partnership would focus on larger commercial developments that required Robert's expertise and capital resources. The apartment complex purchase process was straightforward, but time-sensitive, requiring quick decisions and efficient execution to meet the seller's timeline. I secured financing through a combination of conventional loans and private capital, structuring the transaction to minimize cash requirements while maintaining acceptable debt service coverage ratios. The closing took place in late summer, making me the owner of my largest individual real estate investment and establishing me as a significant player in the local rental housing market. The property required immediate attention to several maintenance issues, but the overall condition was good and the tenant base was stable. Managing the apartment complex required more sophisticated property management skills than I'd previously needed, including tenant relations, maintenance coordination, and financial reporting for multiple units and diverse rental arrangements. I hired a part-time property management assistant to help with day-to-day operations while maintaining direct oversight of major decisions and tenant issues. The apartment complex performed well from the beginning, with high occupancy rates and consistent rental income that exceeded my projections. Several units became available during the first year, allowing me to upgrade them with modern fixtures and appliances that justified higher rental rates from new tenants. The success of the apartment complex investment reinforced my confidence in real estate as a wealth-building strategy and provided the financial foundation for pursuing additional opportunities. The property generated sufficient cash flow to support debt service while contributing to my personal income and investment capital for future acquisitions. By the end of my first year as owner of the apartment complex, I had established myself as a respected property owner and developer in the Riverside real estate market. My portfolio included diverse properties generating consistent income, and I had developed relationships with contractors, lenders, and other professionals who could support continued growth and expansion. The transformation from hardware store employee to real estate investor and developer had taken less than 5 years. a timeline that surprised even me when I reflected on how much had changed. The journey had required constant learning, calculated, risk-taking, and the willingness to pursue opportunities even when they stretched my capabilities and resources. More importantly, the real estate success had given me financial independence and professional credibility that extended far beyond property ownership. I was regularly invited to speak at investment seminars and business forums, sharing my experience with other aspiring real estate investors and entrepreneurs. The speaking engagements led to consulting opportunities, with individuals and small investment groups seeking advice on property acquisition and development strategies. The consulting work was intellectually stimulating and financially rewarding, providing additional income while expanding my professional network and industry knowledge. One consulting client was particularly interesting. A group of young professionals who wanted to pool their resources to purchase and renovate a small apartment building similar to my first investment property. They had identified a promising opportunity, but lacked the experience and knowledge to evaluate it properly or manage the renovation process effectively. I worked with the investment group for several months, helping them analyze the property, secure financing, and coordinate renovation work. The project was successful, generating strong returns for the investors while providing me with valuable experience in collaborative investment structures and group decision-making processes. The success of the consulting project led to additional opportunities to work with investment groups and individual clients on various real estate projects. I developed a reputation for practical, results-oriented advice that helped clients avoid common mistakes while maximizing their investment returns. The consulting work also reinforced my understanding of real estate investment principles and strategies, requiring me to articulate concepts and processes that I'd learned through trial and error. Teaching others about real estate investment deepened my own knowledge while providing insights into different approaches and perspectives on property ownership and development. As my real estate portfolio and professional reputation continued to grow, I began to consider longer-term goals and strategies for building wealth and contributing to community development. The success I'd achieved provided a solid foundation, but I wanted to pursue more ambitious projects that would have greater impact on the communities where I worked. One opportunity that particularly interested me was affordable housing development, creating quality rental housing for working families and individuals who were being priced out of the market by rising property values and gentrification. The financial returns from affordable housing projects were typically lower than market-rate developments, but the social impact was significant, and the projects often qualified for favorable financing and tax incentives. I began researching affordable housing development programs and financing options, including government initiatives and nonprofit partnerships that could make such projects financially viable. The learning process was complex and time-consuming, requiring understanding of regulatory requirements, community development principles, and social impact measurement techniques. The research into affordable housing development also led me to consider the broader implications of real estate investment and development work. Property ownership and development decisions had significant impacts on communities, affecting housing affordability, neighborhood character, and economic opportunity for existing residents. I wanted to ensure that my real estate activities contributed positively to community development, rather than simply generating personal wealth at the expense of local residents. The goal was to find investment strategies that aligned with my values while providing adequate financial returns to justify the time and capital commitments required. The balance between profitability and social responsibility was challenging but important, requiring careful consideration of project design, tenant selection, and long-term management strategies. I began incorporating community impact considerations into my investment analysis, evaluating projects based on their contribution to neighborhood stability and economic opportunity, as well as their financial returns. This broader perspective on real estate investment led me to become more involved in local community development organizations and planning processes. I joined the board of a nonprofit housing organization and began attending city planning meetings regularly, contributing my real estate expertise to discussions about zoning, development incentives, and affordable housing policy. The community involvement was time-consuming but rewarding, providing opportunities to influence policy decisions that affected real estate development while learning from other professionals who shared my interests in responsible development practices. The experience also expanded my professional network and led to new project opportunities that combined profit potential with community benefit. One such opportunity emerged from my involvement with the nonprofit housing organization, A Chance, to develop a small, affordable housing project on a city-owned lot that had been vacant for several years. The project would require navigating complex financing structures and regulatory requirements, but it would also demonstrate the viability of affordable housing development in Riverside's evolving market. The affordable housing project became a year-long effort involving multiple stakeholders, including city officials, nonprofit partners, and private investors willing to accept lower returns in exchange for social impact. The complexity of the project was challenging but educational, requiring skills in public-private partnerships, community engagement, and impact measurement that extended well beyond traditional real estate development. The project was ultimately successful, creating 8 units of affordable rental housing that served working families while generating modest but acceptable returns for investors. More importantly, the project demonstrated that affordable housing development was feasible in Riverside, potentially opening the door for additional projects that would address the community's growing need for workforce housing. The success of the affordable housing project enhanced my reputation as a developer who could manage complex projects while balancing multiple stakeholder interests. The recognition led to additional opportunities to work on community development projects, including a mixed-income housing development that would combine affordable and market-rate units in a single project. As I reflected on the trajectory of my real estate career, I was struck by how much had changed since that morning when Brandon had asked to stay in my room. The journey from displaced young woman to successful real estate developer had been challenging, but ultimately rewarding, providing financial security and professional fulfillment that exceeded my original expectations. The transformation had also affected my relationship with my family in unexpected ways. My parents had adjusted well to their new role as tenants in the house they'd previously owned, and they seemed genuinely proud of my professional success, even though they didn't fully understand how I'd achieved it. Brandon had also evolved, finding steady employment and maintaining his own apartment while pursuing more realistic business opportunities. Our relationship had improved significantly once he was no longer dependent on my family for housing and support, allowing us to interact as adults rather than as competitors for family resources and attention. Jessica had been consistently supportive throughout my real estate journey, offering encouragement and practical assistance when needed. She had also begun investing in real estate herself, purchasing a small duplex that she managed while continuing her nursing career. Our shared interest in property investment had strengthened our relationship and provided a foundation for ongoing collaboration and mutual support. Tyler remained my closest friend and most trusted advisor, celebrating my successes while providing honest feedback when I needed perspective on challenging decisions. His unwavering support had been crucial during the most difficult periods of my real estate journey, and his friendship continued to be one of the most valuable aspects of my personal and professional life. The real estate success had also provided opportunities to give back to the community in meaningful ways, through both direct investment in affordable housing and volunteer work with organizations focused on community development and housing policy. The ability to contribute to positive change while building personal wealth felt like the ideal combination of profit and purpose. As I prepared for the next phase of my real estate career, I was excited about the possibilities for continued growth and impact. The foundation I'd built through careful investment and strategic development positioned me well for larger projects and more ambitious goals, while the relationships and reputation I'd developed provided access to resources and opportunities that would have been impossible to imagine when I'd started working at the hardware store. The journey from displaced daughter to successful real estate developer had been neither easy nor predictable, but it had been ultimately transformative in ways that extended far beyond financial success. The experience had taught me to trust my own judgment, pursue my own goals, and create the kind of life I wanted, rather than accepting whatever circumstances others created for me. Most importantly, the real estate success had provided a sense of security and control that I'd never experienced before, knowing that my financial future was largely in my own hands rather than dependent on other people's decisions or circumstances. The independence and confidence that came with property ownership and development success felt like the most valuable outcome of the entire journey. Standing in my office overlooking downtown Riverside, surrounded by the evidence of successful real estate projects and community development initiatives, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction and anticipation for what might come next. The transformation from hardware store employee to real estate developer had been remarkable, but I sensed that the most exciting chapters of the story were still ahead. The phone rang, interrupting my reflection. It was Robert, calling to discuss a new development opportunity that had just come to market. A prominent downtown property was available for purchase, offering the potential for a major mixed-use development that could transform an entire city block while generating substantial returns for investors. As I listened to Robert describe the opportunity and began to consider the possibilities, I felt the familiar excitement of a new challenge and the confidence that came from years of successful real estate investment and development. The journey that had begun with losing my bedroom to Brandon had led to opportunities and achievements that I could never have imagined when I'd first started sleeping on my parents' couch. The transformation had been complete, but the story was far from over. Each successful project led to new opportunities, and each new opportunity represented another chance to build wealth, create value, and contribute to community development in meaningful ways. The future felt full of possibility, built on the solid foundation of properties, relationships, and experiences that had transformed me from a displaced young woman into a confident and successful real estate developer. The downtown property Robert had called about turned out to be the old Riverside Bank building, a 4-story Art Deco structure that had been vacant for 3 years since the bank relocated to a modern facility in the suburbs. The building occupied nearly half a city block and represented the most ambitious development opportunity I'd ever encountered. Walking through the empty banking hall with Robert, I could envision the transformation possibilities. The soaring ceilings and ornate architectural details would create stunning residential lofts, while the ground floor banking spaces could house retail establishments or professional offices. The building's prominence on Main Street would make it a catalyst for broader downtown revitalization. The financial scope of the project was daunting. The purchase price alone would require several $1,000,000, and the renovation costs would easily double that amount. Even with Robert's experience and capital resources, the project would stretch our partnership to its limits and require creative financing structures involving multiple investors and lenders. I spent weeks analyzing the financial projections and market conditions that would determine the project's viability. The residential rental market in downtown Riverside was strengthening, driven by young professionals who wanted urban living options without the expense of larger cities. The commercial space would be more challenging to lease, but the building's historic character and prominent location offered unique advantages for the right tenants. The due diligence process revealed both opportunities and challenges. The building's structure was remarkably solid, with minimal foundation issues and architectural features that had been well maintained despite years of vacancy. However, the mechanical systems were completely outdated, and bringing the building up to modern codes would require extensive electrical, plumbing, and HVAC work. Environmental assessments identified some concerns related to asbestos and lead, paint that would need professional remediation before renovation work could begin. The additional costs were significant, but manageable within our overall project budget, and they wouldn't prevent us from moving forward with the acquisition and development plans. The financing package took months to assemble, involving a combination of traditional construction loans, historic preservation tax credits, and private investment from individuals interested in downtown development. Robert's reputation and track record were crucial in securing favorable terms and convincing lenders to support such an ambitious project. My role in the financing process was more extensive than in previous projects, reflecting my growing expertise and Robert's confidence in my abilities. I prepared detailed market analyses, construction cost estimates, and financial projections that became central components of our loan applications and investor presentations. The city planning approval process was complex but generally supportive, with most officials recognizing the project's potential impact on downtown revitalization. The historic preservation requirements added some constraints to our renovation plans, but they also qualified us for tax credits that significantly improved the project's financial returns. Community response to the bank building project was overwhelmingly positive, with local business owners and residents expressing enthusiasm for the economic activity and housing options it would create. Several potential tenants expressed interest in the retail and office spaces before we'd even secured final approvals, suggesting strong demand for the commercial components of the development. The construction process began in early spring with the complex work of environmental remediation and historic preservation. Removing asbestos and lead paint required specialized contractors and extensive safety precautions that slowed progress, but ensured the building would be safe for future occupants. The historic preservation work was fascinating and challenging, requiring careful restoration of original architectural features while integrating modern systems and amenities. We worked with craftsmen who specialized in Art Deco restoration, ensuring that the building's character was preserved while creating functional spaces for contemporary use. The residential units were designed as luxury lofts with high-end finishes and modern appliances, targeting professionals who could afford premium rents for unique living spaces. Each unit featured exposed brick walls, restored hardwood floors, and oversized windows that showcased the building's architectural heritage while providing abundant natural light. The commercial spaces were designed for flexibility, with minimal, built-in features that would allow different types of businesses to customize the areas according to their specific needs. The former banking hall became a dramatic retail space with 20-foot ceilings and original marble details that would create a stunning environment for the right tenant. Marketing for the project began months before completion, with prospective tenants touring the construction site and reserving units based on floor plans and finish samples. The response exceeded our expectations, with most residential units pre-leased and several commercial spaces reserved by established businesses planning to relocate or expand. The bank building project was completed 18 months after construction began, representing the most complex and successful development I'd been involved with to that point. The grand opening celebration drew over 1,000 people, including state and local officials who praised the project as a model for historic preservation and downtown revitalization. The financial returns from the bank building exceeded our projections, with premium rents for both residential and commercial spaces generating strong cash flow that justified the extensive renovation investment. The project also established our development partnership as a major force in the regional real estate market, leading to additional opportunities and investor interest. More importantly, the bank building project demonstrated my evolution from individual property investor to sophisticated real estate developer capable of managing complex, high-stakes projects. The success attracted attention from other developers, investors, and municipal officials throughout the region who were interested in similar preservation and revitalization initiatives. The recognition led to speaking opportunities at real estate conferences and urban planning forums, where I shared insights about historic preservation development and downtown revitalization strategies. The presentations enhanced my professional reputation while providing opportunities to learn from other developers working on similar projects in different markets. One speaking engagement proved particularly significant. A conference on women in real estate development, where I met several other female developers who had built successful careers in a traditionally male-dominated industry. The networking. Opportunities led to informal mentoring relationships and potential collaboration possibilities that would influence my future projects and career trajectory. The success of the bank building project also attracted media attention, with local and regional publications featuring articles about the development and my role in its creation. The coverage was generally positive, emphasizing the economic impact and historic preservation aspects of the project, while highlighting my background and rapid rise in the real estate industry. The media attention brought unexpected personal consequences, including recognition from people I hadn't seen in years, and renewed interest from family members who had previously been skeptical of my real estate activities. My parents expressed pride in the media coverage, though they still seemed somewhat bewildered by the scale and complexity of my business success. Brandon reached out after seeing an article about the bank building project, congratulating me on the achievement and expressing amazement at how much I'd accomplished since he'd lived in my bedroom. Our conversation was cordial and respectful, reflecting how much both of our circumstances had changed over the intervening years. The success and recognition from the bank building project created new challenges and opportunities that required careful consideration of my long-term goals and priorities. Multiple developers approached me about potential partnerships, investors inquired about funding additional projects, and municipal officials from other cities sought my involvement in their downtown development initiatives. The opportunities were exciting but overwhelming, requiring me to develop more sophisticated business structures and professional systems to manage increasing responsibilities and commitments. I hired additional staff, including a project manager and administrative assistant, to help coordinate my various real estate activities and consulting engagements. I also established a formal real estate development company, creating legal and financial structures that would support larger projects while providing appropriate liability protection and tax advantages. The business incorporation represented another milestone in my evolution from individual investor to professional real estate developer. The development company's first major project was a mixed-use development in a neighboring city, involving the renovation of a former textile mill into artist studios and affordable housing units. The project combined historic preservation with community development goals, creating live workspaces for creative professionals while addressing local housing needs. The mill renovation required different skills and approaches than previous projects, including extensive community engagement and coordination with arts organizations and affordable housing advocates. The project timeline was longer, and the financial returns were lower than purely commercial developments, but the social impact and community benefits made it personally rewarding in ways that pure profit couldn't match. Working on the mill project reinforced my commitment to development work that balanced financial success with community benefit, creating value for investors while addressing real social and economic needs. The approach required more complex project structuring and stakeholder management, but it also provided deeper satisfaction and stronger community relationships. The mill project's success led to additional opportunities in community development and affordable housing, including partnerships with nonprofit organizations and government agencies focused on addressing housing needs and economic development. Challenges. The work was complex and sometimes frustrating, but it aligned with my values while utilizing my professional skills in meaningful ways. As my development company grew and took on more ambitious projects, I found myself spending less time on individual property management and more time on strategic planning and project development. The shift required hiring property management professionals to oversee my existing rental properties, while I focused on acquisition and development activities. The evolution from hands-on property owner to professional developer represented both opportunity and challenge, providing access to larger projects and greater financial returns while requiring delegation of responsibilities I'd previously handled personally. Learning to manage teams and coordinate complex projects with multiple stakeholders demanded new skills and perspectives that stretched my capabilities in productive ways. The growth of my real estate activities also required more sophisticated, financial management and planning, including corporate accounting systems, investment tracking, and tax planning strategies that went well beyond individual property ownership. I worked with accountants and financial advisors who specialized in real estate development to ensure my business structures and strategies were optimized for long-term growth and success. The professional relationships I developed during this period became crucial resources for navigating increasingly complex projects and business challenges. Working with experienced attorneys, accountants, contractors, and other professionals provided access to expertise and networks that would have been impossible to develop independently. One of the most valuable relationships was with Catherine Mills, a commercial real estate attorney who specialized in complex development transactions and public-private partnerships. Catherine provided legal guidance for my most challenging projects while becoming a trusted advisor on business strategy and risk management issues. Catherine's expertise was particularly valuable for projects involving historic preservation tax credits, affordable housing financing, and municipal partnerships that required navigation of complex regulatory and compliance requirements. Her guidance helped me avoid costly mistakes while maximizing the financial and strategic benefits of various incentive programs and partnership opportunities. The professional relationships and business growth also provided opportunities to mentor other aspiring real estate investors and developers, particularly women who were interested in building careers in the industry. I began offering informal mentoring and consulting services, sharing insights and strategies that had contributed to my success, while learning from others' experiences and perspectives. The mentoring relationships were personally rewarding and professionally beneficial, providing opportunities to give back to the community while expanding my network and understanding of different approaches to real estate investment and development. Many of the individuals I worked with went on to successful careers in real estate, creating a network of professionals who continued to collaborate and support each other's projects. As my 5th year in real estate development concluded, I reflected on the remarkable transformation that had occurred since that morning when Brandon had displaced me from my bedroom. The journey from hardware store employee to successful real estate developer had exceeded my wildest expectations, providing financial security and professional fulfillment that I couldn't have imagined when I'd first started sleeping on my parents' couch. The success had also created responsibilities and opportunities that extended far beyond personal wealth building, including community development work, mentoring relationships, and industry leadership roles that positioned me to influence policy and practice in meaningful ways. The evolution from individual investor to community leader felt like a natural progression that aligned with my values while utilizing my professional expertise. Looking ahead, I could see numerous opportunities for continued growth and impact, including larger development projects, expanded community development work, and potential partnerships that could amplify my influence and effectiveness. The foundation I'd built through careful investment and strategic development provided a solid platform for pursuing even more ambitious goals and creating greater positive impact in the communities where I worked. The transformation from displaced daughter to successful real estate developer had been remarkable, but I sensed that the most significant chapters of my story were still to be written. Each successful project had opened doors to new opportunities, and each new opportunity represented another chance to build wealth, create value, and contribute to positive change in meaningful and lasting ways. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, 5 years after I'd become my parents' landlord. Jessica's voice was tight with worry when she told me that Dad had suffered a heart attack and was in the hospital. The doctors said he was stable, but the medical bills and his inability to work would create financial strain that my parents couldn't handle on their limited income. I drove to the hospital immediately, finding my family gathered in the waiting room with expressions of concern and helplessness that I remembered from my childhood whenever serious problems arose. Mom looked fragile and overwhelmed, while Brandon sat quietly in the corner, having rushed over from his apartment when he heard the news. Dad's recovery would take months, requiring cardiac rehabilitation and lifestyle changes that would prevent him from returning to the physical labor jobs that had sustained our family for decades. The medical expenses, even with insurance, would be substantial, and the loss of his income would make it impossible for my parents to maintain their current lifestyle. As we sat in the hospital waiting room, I realized that my family was looking to me for solutions in a way they never had before. The quiet daughter who had once been displaced by Brandon's temporary stay had become the family member with the resources and expertise to navigate this crisis effectively. I spent the evening reviewing my parents' financial situation and considering options for helping them through Dad's recovery period. Their lease on the family house included provisions for emergency situations, and I could certainly reduce their rent or defer payments temporarily without causing financial hardship for my development business. But as I examined their broader circumstances, I realized that Dad's heart attack represented more than a temporary financial challenge. At their age and with his health condition, they would need ongoing support and security that went beyond short-term assistance with medical bills and living expenses. The solution that emerged was both practical and symbolic. I offered to restructure their living arrangement entirely, converting part of the family house into a separate apartment for them while developing the rest of the property into additional rental units that would generate income while providing them with permanent housing security. The renovation would transform the single-family house into a duplex, giving my parents a comfortable apartment with modified features for Dad's recovery, while creating a second rental unit that would help cover the property's expenses. The project would also increase the property's value and income potential significantly. My parents were initially resistant to the idea, worried about the disruption and cost of such extensive renovations. But as I explained the financial benefits and long-term security the arrangement would provide, they began to understand that this was an opportunity rather than an imposition. The house renovation began in November, requiring my parents to temporarily relocate to a small apartment I owned near downtown while the construction work was completed. The project involved significant structural modifications, including creating separate entrances, installing additional plumbing and electrical systems, and soundproofing between units. Working on my childhood home was emotionally complex, involving memories and relationships that went far beyond typical investment properties. Standing in my former bedroom as contractors installed new walls and fixtures, I reflected on how dramatically circumstances had changed since Brandon had occupied this same space 5 years earlier. The bedroom where I'd once felt displaced and unimportant was being transformed into part of a master suite for the rental unit that would generate income to support my parents' retirement. The irony was profound, but not bitter, representing the natural consequences of choices and priorities that had shaped all of our lives over the intervening years. Brandon visited the construction site several times during the renovation, expressing amazement at the scope and quality of the work being done. He seemed genuinely impressed by what I'd accomplished professionally, and he offered to help with any aspects of the project that didn't require specialized skills. His offer to help was sincere and appreciated, reflecting how much our relationship had matured since his extended stay in my room years earlier. He had found stability in his marketing career and had recently gotten engaged to a woman who shared his interests in entrepreneurship and community involvement. The house renovation was completed in February, creating 2 beautiful apartments that exceeded everyone's expectations for comfort and functionality. My parents' unit included features designed for Dad's recovery and ongoing health needs, while the rental unit appealed to young professionals who wanted quality housing in an established neighborhood. The first tenant for the rental unit was a nurse at the local hospital who appreciated the location and the high-quality finishes throughout the apartment. Her lease provided rental income that covered the property's expenses while generating modest profit that contributed to my parents' financial security. More importantly, the renovation had created a permanent solution to my parents' housing and financial needs, ensuring they could remain in their neighborhood and community while having access to ongoing support as they aged. The arrangement provided dignity and independence while acknowledging their practical needs and limitations. Dad's recovery progressed steadily through the spring, with cardiac rehabilitation and lifestyle changes, helping him regain strength and confidence. He couldn't return to physical labor, but he was able to help with light maintenance tasks around the property and take pride in the beautiful renovation that had transformed his former home. Mom adapted well to the smaller living space, finding it easier to maintain while appreciating the modern appliances and accessibility features that made daily tasks less challenging. She also enjoyed having a responsible tenant nearby who provided additional security and occasional assistance when needed. The success of the family house renovation project reinforced my commitment to real estate development that served multiple purposes beyond simple profit generation. The project had solved practical problems while strengthening family relationships and creating long-term value for everyone involved. As spring progressed, I received recognition that crystallized how much my professional standing had evolved. The Regional Real Estate Development Association invited me to deliver the keynote address at their annual conference, acknowledging my success in historic preservation and community development projects. The keynote speech provided an opportunity to reflect publicly on my journey from hardware store employee to successful developer, emphasizing the importance of persistence, strategic thinking, and community-focused development approaches. The audience response was enthusiastic, with many attendees expressing interest in collaboration opportunities and additional speaking engagements. The recognition also attracted attention from a national real estate development magazine, which featured a profile article about my career and development philosophy. The article highlighted my transition from individual investor to community-focused developer, emphasizing projects that balanced financial returns with social impact and community benefit. The media coverage brought opportunities from developers and investors in other regions who were interested in my approach to historic preservation and mixed-use development. Several potential partnerships emerged from these contacts, including opportunities to expand my development activities into larger metropolitan markets. As I considered these expansion opportunities, I reflected on how my priorities and perspectives had evolved since entering the real estate industry. The financial success and professional recognition were gratifying, but the most meaningful aspects of my work were the community relationships and positive impact that resulted from thoughtful development projects. The journey from displaced daughter to successful real estate developer had taught me that true success required more than financial achievement. The most satisfying projects were those that created value for multiple stakeholders while contributing to community development and addressing real social and economic needs. Standing in the renovated family house, surrounded by evidence of successful projects and positive community impact, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment and gratitude for the opportunities that had emerged from challenging circumstances. The bedroom displacement that had seemed so unfair 5 years earlier had catalyzed a transformation that exceeded anything I could have imagined at the time. The experience had also reinforced my belief that apparent setbacks often contained the seeds of future success, provided one was willing to respond with determination and strategic thinking rather than resentment and resignation. The key was recognizing opportunities within challenges and maintaining focus on long-term goals despite short-term difficulties. My parents had expressed gratitude and pride in ways that felt genuine and meaningful, acknowledging not just my professional success but also my character and commitment to family despite the difficulties we'd experienced. Their appreciation meant more than any external recognition or financial achievement. Brandon's evolution had been equally remarkable, demonstrating that people could change and grow when circumstances demanded it. His current stability and success reflected lessons learned from his earlier struggles, and our improved relationship showed that family bonds could strengthen rather than break under pressure. Jessica had also benefited from my real estate success, gaining insights and opportunities that contributed to her own property investments and financial planning. Our collaboration on various projects had strengthened our relationship while providing her with additional income and investment experience. The transformation of our family dynamics showed that challenging circumstances could ultimately strengthen relationships if people were willing to learn, grow, and adapt to changing realities. The displacement and conflict that had marked Brandon's extended stay had eventually led to better understanding and more authentic relationships for everyone involved. As I prepared to pursue new development opportunities and expand my business activities, I felt confident that the foundation I'd built through careful investment and strategic development would support continued growth and positive impact. The journey from hardware store employee to successful developer had exceeded my expectations in every meaningful way. The future held exciting possibilities for larger projects, expanded community development work, and continued professional growth that would allow me to create even greater positive impact while building long-term wealth and security. The skills, relationships, and reputation I'd developed provided a solid platform for pursuing ambitious goals and meaningful contributions. Most importantly, the experience had taught me to trust my own judgment and pursue my own goals rather than accepting limitations imposed by other people's expectations or circumstances. The transformation from displaced daughter to successful landlord had been remarkable, but it was also the natural result of persistence, strategic thinking, and commitment to creating the life I wanted, rather than settling for whatever others provided. Looking back at the journey that had begun with losing my bedroom to Brandon, I could see that every challenge had contributed to growth, and every setback had contained opportunities for those willing to recognize and pursue them. The story that had started with displacement and family conflict had evolved into one of success, contribution, and meaningful relationships built on mutual respect and shared achievements. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.